When we talk about the story of modern India, we often jump from the decline of the Mughals straight to the arrival of the British. But what about the massive power that stood right in between them? Well, in this explainer, we're diving into the incredible rise of the Marathas, a force that totally reshaped the subcontinent.
So you gotta wonder, how did that even happen? How did a regional power, starting out in the Deccan plateau, manage to rise up and dominate pretty much the entire subcontinent right before the British showed up? That's the big question we're tackling today, and let me tell you, it's a fantastic story of culture, a bold vision, and some absolutely brilliant strategy. We're gonna trace their whole journey in 5 key stages. We'll start with the cultural awakening that kind of set the stage. Then, we'll get into Shivaji's incredible leadership, see how that empire was actually built, watch it reach its absolute peak, and finally, look at the showdown that changed India's destiny for good.
Okay, so first things first. Before there was ever a Maratha empire, there was this powerful cultural and spiritual movement bubbling up, one that really brought people together.
This sense of unity, it was really sparked by saints like Ram Das and Tukaram. They were part of what's called the Bhakti movement, and what they did was pretty revolutionary. They just bypassed the elite, complicated language of Sanskrit and started writing these powerful, beautiful poems and songs in Marathi. The language everyday people actually spoke. This did more than just spread spiritual ideas. It created a shared identity, a common ground that would become the perfect foundation for political unity.
So what is bhakti really? Well, at its heart, it was this idea that anyone could have a personal connection to the divine through simple faith, not through all these complex rituals. By making spirituality accessible to everyone, this movement gave Marathi society a solid cultural backbone, and that was an absolutely essential ingredient for the political revolution that was just around the corner.
And this is where the man of the hour steps in, the one who harnessed all that energy and turned it into a political vision, the legendary Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Born way back in 1630, Shivaji grew up in a world that was pretty much falling apart. From his family's estate, or Jagir, in Pune, he had a front-row seat to the constant destructive wars between the Deccan sultanates. He saw his own people being forced to switch sides all the time, and seeing all that chaos and suffering, well, it lit a fire in him to create something new. Now this word, Jagir, it's super important if you want to understand this period. It was basically a piece of land given to someone in exchange for their service. It was a core part of the system back then. Shivaji started out working within this system, but his goal was to build something completely different.
And get this, he started young, like really young. At just 16 years old, he's already out there capturing forts. And he wasn't doing it for himself. He was driven by this powerful, revolutionary idea he called Swarajya. And this wasn't just about kicking out the old rulers. It was about creating a sovereign kingdom for his people, a just state, free from the control of faraway empires. This idea became his life's mission.
Okay, this timeline right here, this is gold, especially if you're prepping for exams. It's a fantastic, quick summary of his life's biggest moments. You can see the whole story here, from his early start to that famous escape from Agra, and of course his official coronation. Definitely one to remember. So, how did he do it? How did Shivaji actually turn this big vision into a real kingdom when he was up against these huge, powerful empires? The answer? Sheer military brilliance and strategic genius.
Shivaji's success really came down to 2 major game changers. First, he totally mastered guerrilla warfare. He used the hilly terrain of his homeland as an advantage, hitting larger armies with speed and surprise. And second, he built a professional navy to protect the coastline. This was a huge deal. No other major Indian power, not even the mighty Mughals, had done that.
This story about Afzal Khan perfectly shows you his strategic mind at work. So, this powerful general, Afzal Khan, comes down to crush Shivaji, thinking he's just some minor nuisance. Shivaji agrees to meet him one-on-one, but suspects a trap, so he comes prepared. He hides this wicked weapon called a wagnach. It literally means tiger's claw, and in one stunning moment, he strikes down the general. Then at his signal, his hidden army swoops in and completely routs the now leaderless enemy forces. Just brilliant.
And then there was his raid on the Mughal nobleman Shaista Khan. It was another legendary move. He took just a handful of soldiers and snuck into the enemy camp in the middle of the night. Our source material compares it to a modern-day surgical strike. And that's a perfect analogy. It was precise, targeted, and it dealt a massive psychological blow to the Mughal Empire.
But perhaps the most famous story of all is his great escape from the very heart of the Mughal Empire.
After being insulted by Emperor Aurangzeb in his own court at Agra, Shivaji was put under house arrest. I mean, escape seemed totally impossible.
His solution was just pure genius. He pretended to be sick and started this daily routine of sending out these huge baskets of sweets as offerings. At first, the guards were really careful, checking every single basket. But after a while, they just got lazy and stopped looking. That was the moment. Shivaji and his son hid inside 2 of the baskets and were carried right past the guards to freedom. It was an absolute masterclass in psychology and patience. A few years after that incredible escape, in 1674, Shivaji was formally crowned Chhatrapati at Raigad Fort. This coronation was a huge deal. It marked the official beginning of a sovereign, independent Maratha state. So by the time of his death in 1680, look what he had built. This map shows the core kingdom he had carved out. It was a strong, independent state in the Deccan that would serve as the launch pad for a future all-India empire.
But the story doesn't stop with Shivaji, not at all. In the next chapter, his kingdom didn't just survive, it exploded into an empire that would come to dominate the entire subcontinent.
So in the decades of constant war that came after Shivaji, a really important political change happened. To manage this huge ongoing conflict with the Mughals, the day-to-day power actually shifted from the king, the Chhatrapati, to the hereditary prime minister, known as the Peshwa. This move made the command structure way more centralized and efficient, and that, in turn, fueled an age of unbelievable expansion. And what was the result of that expansion? Whoa, just look at this map. By 1759, the Maratha Empire was the dominant power across India. Seriously, just think back to that earlier map of Shivaji's kingdom and compare it to this. The growth was just explosive.
But as so often happens in history, this peak was followed by a final massive confrontation, not with the old rivals, the Mughals, but with a new power rising up from Europe.
By the late 1700s, the biggest thing standing in the way of British domination in India was the Maratha Empire. They fought 3 huge wars, and while the Marathas actually won the first one decisively, their power was eventually chipped away by internal fighting. That disunity, combined with facing a technologically and organizationally superior British force, was a fatal combination. The Third War in 1818 marked the end of their reign. And this right here, this quote from our source material, is the crucial takeaway. It's so important to remember this. When the British colonized the subcontinent, the main Indian power they had to defeat wasn't the fading Mughal Empire. It was the Marathas. So this whole incredible saga leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. The Maratha story shows us how cultural unity and brilliant leadership can literally build an empire from scratch. But it also shows us how internal divisions can bring that very same empire crashing down. So what lessons can we really learn from this amazing rise and fall?